amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's David McMaster here from Eastminster United Church in Belleville, and we have already been through one of these chats with our Eastminster people, and it was with Cheryl, a minister in Belfast in Northern Ireland. Well, we're going to come back now into a narrower view and look at what's happening in our own community in Belleville, and I have the Reverend Jennifer Cameron here with me from the Presbyterian Church. So we're going to have a conversation, and not so much maybe me just asking questions, but she'll ask them as well. And we'll find out a little bit about how life is going with church and COVID, and church in a COVID era. So thanks, Jennifer.
Oh, thanks for inviting me to be part of it.
Good to chat with you. So first of all, tell us something about your church.
It's great. St. Columba is a, how do I describe St. Columba? St. Columba is a community of people. I guess the first thing that always comes to mind when I'm asked about it is this is a congregation that knows how to care about each other. It's including me and my family. It's really quite amazing the way that they look out for each other, that they look after each other. If there's something going on in somebody's family, even if they're far away, you know, they're very there for each other. So they know how to be a pastoral community. And from what I'm guessing, I've been here for 14 years, and from what I'm hearing, it's always been that way in this congregation. So they're a church that I would say, I mean, you know, they call Belleville the friendly city. And I often think that about St. Columba. They're the friendly church. They know how to live the love they've been given, and express it and show it toward others. So yeah, they're a really fine group of people, and they're very committed to showing the love of Christ, not just to each other, but far beyond the congregation. Tons of volunteering that happens and all that kind of stuff. So they're very much about love, I would say.
It's a very similar description to my own congregation. So you're St. Columba Presbyterian, I'm Eastminster United, and the churches are 2 blocks apart.
Yeah.
So I think we're drawing from the same community and very friendly. And I actually remember when I first went to Eastminster, so not as long as you, 3 years ago, that on my first service, I sat down at the front of the church. I'm chatting with the children in the middle of the service. And it was the first Sunday in December, and we're just going into Advent, and I recall as part of it, I sang the 3rd verse, not the first verse, but the 3rd verse of Away in a Manger. And just as soon as I started singing, the whole congregation just joined in.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, this is great. They're just, you know, they've got that. They're very warm.
Yeah.
So we've had 1 or 2 technical problems here, and let's hope we have them sorted out. Yes, getting back to this question, how is your congregation doing with COVID and the fact that they've been closed, and how long have they been closed and that sort of thing?
We've been closed since March. We did open for 4 weeks from the middle of September until after the first week in October, when we had our 60th anniversary service, which was rather low key given what it could have been. Mm-hmm. And we closed again after that because the virus ended up in our community. So we closed again, and we haven't reopened. And now we're figuring out what to do for Advent and Christmas.
Mm-hmm. But how are people handling that? Are you finding different people do it in in different ways? There's some regret they're not in church. How are people handling it?
I'm hearing from some people, and really they're the ones that don't have internet access. They're ones who are not computer savvy, who are not online, most of whom are elderly. And when I call those folks and talk to them, they're really missing being in worship. They still receive everything in hard copy. They have hand delivery to their homes of sermons and a midweek thing that I send out every week, and a weekly prayer I send out. They get all of that. But it's not the same. I mean, they're just really missing being with the community. So that's been really hard on them. The people who are online, I'm not hearing that from them quite as much because they're online and they're seeing what's going on. In fact, I had a message from somebody recently saying, for Christmas Eve service online, can you put your kids in it? Because I really miss seeing them. Sure. So, you know, that's the online thing has been great, but it's not the same as meeting in person.
Mm-hmm.
How about you folks? Like how are your folks responding to opening, closing, online, not online, what have you?
Yeah, we've been closed since 22nd of March was the first Sunday, and then we did open the third Sunday in September, and ran for about 5 weeks, I think it was, and then we had to close down again because the virus was starting to take off. It hasn't come quite as quickly as we thought, but now that we're in the end of November, things are really getting a bit negative on that front within Belleville and Trenton areas. So
yeah,
I found a lot of people are very appreciative that we've been able to morph into, you know, a YouTube channel and making things happen on that route. But like you, there are those who generally are older and they don't have access to computers and Wi-Fi at the same level, so they are missing things. But even some within the group, I think, as you were hinting at, who do have access to the internet, they're missing just the, you know, being in church. They're missing being in community and their friends. And it's something like church, as I've thought about it over these months, it is very community oriented. Like all that we do are the gatherings of people, and people are missing that.
They are. That human contact is so important. You know, it's one thing if you live with other people in your home, but if you live alone, you know, it just, yeah, it can become very lonely. You know, I try to send out as much encouragement as I can to people by the phone, by, you know, texts and email messages, that kind of thing. But without being together, it's hard on them. It's really hard on them. And we've had some pretty serious illness in the congregation too. And it's been really hard on them not to be able to have somebody just come and visit and sit and hold their hand and pray with them. And it's been difficult.
And there's a flip side to that. It's not just for the lay people in the church, but also for the ministers, because the ways we did things before aren't available to us now. So, you know,
no,
we tie so much of our being up with Sunday service, and that's not in place now. Even if we do it online, there's the pastoral care. How do you do that at a distance? How do you keep people safe? You know, if you do have to go in and see someone, and there's just so much uncertainty in this. How do you find other clergy that you've been talking with within Presbyterian circles? Are they hanging in there?
Well, I think everybody's hanging in there. There's a lot of fatigue. I find among a lot of my colleagues, like, we weren't trained for this kind of ministry. You know, I mean, none of us had a course in Zoom meetings at seminary. But So a lot of it is that we're trying to approach things in a way that we're having to sort out and figure out on our own as well. But also, we're having to be so much more creative about how, and some people are just naturally creative that way, but we're having to be so much more creative about how do we present worship? How do we, how do you have a Bible study and keep it interesting? How do you meet? How do you support each other as colleagues without being able to just kind of, meet for a coffee or something like that? So I'm finding people are quite tired. At the same time, I'm finding people are really kind of, enjoying sharing resources back and forth and sharing ideas. One of the things that our local, or well, not necessarily local, but in our presbytery, one of the things that happened was we were invited to share, what are you doing for Christmas Eve? So that people who didn't know yet could kind of, oh, that would be kind of interesting. And you can kind of glean from one another things that other churches, other congregations are going to be doing to celebrate Christmas. So those are the kinds of things that are encouraging and keep us connected. But yeah, it's been tiring. It's been tiring. How about you folks? Have you had much connection with colleagues, either here or further abroad? Well, I know you've been talking to people in Ireland. That's further abroad.
It's interesting when you get onto this online thing. You can find people all over the place, that's one of the actual benefits of this time. We're learning to use new technology and find out that, unlike say 100 years ago when they're dealing with the Spanish flu, we can actually communicate with people. It's not in person, but it is something, and it's a great blessing, I think, for a lot of people. But with colleagues, I find there are some who are struggling, particularly some in rural charges. And a number of our rural charges will have maybe ministers who have taken early retirement or something, and they're then going into a small congregation to work for a number of months. And with this, they found out they're working a lot more months than maybe they had planned to do. And as they're older, they're less likely to have the computer skills necessary to put on a program. So they're really finding it difficult just getting a sense of who they are and what they're doing, because they're not able to have those Sunday services that are so important for us. So I find some of the rural and older ministers are struggling, and I think some of the younger ones are actually reveling in this.
Loving the tech.
So there are differences, but I've read a number of articles actually suggesting that there's a fair amount of depression among clergy, and just the fact that they're not trained for what they're doing now, and they're struggling to find their way. So, but I think so far I'm keeping my head above water. How about you?
I think I'm keeping my head above water. I've had a lot of support in terms of, again, my congregation has been wonderful, but also a couple of friends that I actually reconnected with somebody from years ago, quite by accident. And so she and I have been able to have a few conversations, and it's been so wonderful to talk with somebody who I haven't talked to in a long time. So in those ways, I think I'm not feeling quite as alone as I could, and I'm not in the rural areas. So that's another thing there.
So what do you think the long-term effect of all this is going to be? Where do you see this going in the next year? How will the church survive, that sort of thing?
A crystal ball would be nice here. I wish I could just kind of look into the future and see. I know we're certainly feeling the effects financially. And I know most churches are. We can't hold those normal events and fundraisers and outreach opportunities that we normally would do. I also have a really great concern for the community groups that make use of our building. We have a lot of anonymous groups and things like that, our building for a number of years has kind of been a place to call home, a place to find the support they need. And we can't open the building to them. And I'm really concerned about that because, they're a part of the St. Columba family too. They're part of our community, kind of the extended version of it. I just hope that we'll be able to get to a point, when we have a vaccine or whatever, where we can open the doors again to those groups. I mean, it won't look the same as it did, of course. And that's going to be a long-term effect, I think, is, people are hoping that things will go back to normal. But I really don't see how we can ever go back to the way things used to be. I mean, in some ways, there's some great opportunities here for us to do new things and take new approaches. But in other ways, it's going to be really hard to get that kind of shift in mindset going in terms of how we're functioning as the church, not just Sunday worship, but everything that we do. How are we functioning? How are we connecting with the community? What needs are around us that need to be met that we could be a part of that? Yeah. I mean, things are emerging that we may not have thought of before. And at the same time, I think there's going to be things we all have to let go of because it's just not going to be possible to do them the way that we used to.
I did a message the first week or two of the shutdown in March, so late March, early April, and I talked about the way the exile affected the Jerusalem Jewish community. So prior to exile, they have a temple, they have a place to worship, they have a place to call home, and then as soon as they're taken away to Babylon, they don't have any of that. They're in exile. And it changed them, and it not only changed them for that period they were in exile, but it changed them forever, you might say, because they through that they moved from a people of a temple and rituals and religious elements along those lines to people of the book. And so they became more, the whole idea of a scribe grew up in that sort of era, and the power of the scribe. And then later the synagogue process, sort of the synagogues in communities outside Jerusalem came into play. And they studied the word. So they became a people of the book and the people of the word, which in our Reformed tradition, we know a lot about.
Yeah.
But now with our church home, our sanctuaries not being in use, I'm wondering if it'll change us longer term.
I don't know. I wonder if it will. Interestingly, I just read something today that came out from one of our theological schools. And in it, there were references made to, people, we keep hearing, COVID is changing everything. Well, maybe, but for Christians, for disciples of Jesus, it's Jesus that changes everything. It's Easter that changes everything. It's the word that changes everything. And so I'm kind of wondering, whenever we're able to be back to, the gathered community for worship and fellowship again, are we going to see that same kind of thing happen as you were just referring to with the exile? We've been forced away from our church homes. And I think people are looking at the worshiping community, the community of faith, with different eyes now, and what their priorities are. Their priority is, we want to hear the story of Christ's birth. We don't just want to sing the carols. We want to hear that story together. We want to stand together and sing about it together. It's not the same as, listening to a YouTube playlist, Bing Crosby belting out Silent Night. I mean, it really is quite beautiful, but it's not the same as standing in the sanctuary, singing with the community. So, yeah, I wonder, I wonder if this will make us people more concerned about the traditions of the word rather than the traditions of our own making.
Yeah, and I wonder if it and I don't think it's a bad thing if we actually do more on an individual level with God and with the Word,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing, so that we would have devotional activities going on in our own houses as well as in church.
Mm-hmm.
So can we at Eastminster, how can we pray for you at St. Columba, even though you're just down the street?
That's right. We could stand on the corner and wave at each other. Oh gosh. I guess that we would be constantly aware of the Spirit of God among us, even when we're not gathering. That's my urgent prayer for my congregation, is that they would know that sense of, or that they would sense God's presence with them, regardless of where they're worshiping. But also to know that there's a strength of that shared faith among us that will sustain us through this whole thing. And then, when we can gather again, really give thanks for that. I have heard a lot of gratitude expressed. And so I guess, one of the things I keep praying for my folks over here is that gratitude will continue to grow and be more openly expressed. I think we keep it to ourselves a lot. We're good Presbyterians, we keep it in, but I'm seeing people and hearing people express it much more openly. So I'm really hoping that continues, and that's my prayer. How about your folks at Eastminster? What can we be praying for you?
Just that we get through this and intact. And I don't see any problem with that, actually. But just that people have patience, and particularly for the people who we alluded to earlier, they're struggling because they can't get online, and even though we're providing some written material for them, it's just not the same as getting into church. So there's that, and I think too, just as we go into the future, that God would give us wisdom as to when to open, when it's right to open again, and go before us, because I see down the road later in 2021 the possibility that some people will maybe drift away. They get not church will they'll get out of the habit, and it's hard to get them back. There'll be others that like the online thing and like having a cup of coffee in their kitchen and watching the service. So, how do we get some of these people back, and will there be a rebuilding of the congregation in some ways? So, those would be, thinking down, and as you said, we don't have a crystal ball, but just what the possible things that might happen. But also, I'm very thankful. People have been very committed to the church. People have been committed, mostly financially, and we've been managing. So these are things that I give thanks for as well. And I think God will get us through all this, and we just have to trust that the church will continue to be the church down the road.
That's right. The buildings may be closed, but the church is still alive and well and at work.